Our political system is rotting because a small group of older elites are clinging to power long past their prime. This video is about Mitch McConnell, the man who I think has become the perfect symbol of that rot. An 84-year-old senator who totally vanished from public life, posed for a proof-of-life photo, and still won't let go of his seat gracefully. Here's what I'm going to cover. First, 6 members of this Congress have died in office in a single term, because our leaders are, on average, decades older than the people they represent. Second, a Yale professor argues in his controversial new book that America has quietly become an old-igarchy, and our Senate is literally named after old men. Third, baby boomers, who are a fifth of the population, now control 51% of the nation's wealth, while a generation the same number as them holds barely 1/5 of that. Fourth, 62% of young Americans now say they favor socialism. And I'll tell you why dismissing that statistic I think is the same mistake that elites made about Trump 10 years ago. And 5, nearly 80% of Americans, both on the left and right, agree on a fix, and I'll show you exactly who's blocking it. For background, I'm Neal K. Shah, a Johns Hopkins and NIH-funded caregiving researcher and the CEO of Carry. I've helped thousands of families navigate aging, dementia, and serious illness. I'm not a clinician, but a leading researcher and innovator in caregiving. And I'm telling you, Mitch McConnell's hospital room and many of the caregiving situations I see are part of this same story. So let's start with the facts. On the morning of June 14th, 2026, ambulances, a fire truck, and Capitol Police blocked a quiet Washington street. A neighbor filmed the responders wheeling someone out on a stretcher. Police called it just a medical emergency. Scanner audio reported by NBC News described, someone performing CPR on someone in cardiac arrest. The address was Mitch McConnell's, the longest-serving Senate party leader in American history. Then silence. For nearly a month, his office said only that he was receiving excellent care. They shared no diagnosis and absolutely no timeline. This wasn't out of nowhere. For 2 years, we've watched McConnell freeze mid-sentence at press conferences, staring blankly into space while his aides stepped in. We've watched his falls, hospitalizations, concussion. His decline has been open in public and totally undeniable. On July 12th, he finally released a statement and a proof-of-life photo besides his wife, former Transportation Secretary Elaine Chao, holding that day's Washington Post newspaper. The oldest trick there is, the newspaper held up to prove the date. He said he hadn't broken any bones, hadn't had a heart attack or stroke, and was briefly unconscious and treated for mild pneumonia. A couple weeks later, on July 27th, a second photo and an admission. He was not yet medically cleared to leave rehab and return to work. He missed Kentucky's fancy farm picnic for the first time in decades. As I record this, he has still not yet returned to the Senate, and he has not resigned. So let me be direct. I think this has to end. A senator who cannot appear in public for 2 months, whose office won't explain his condition, who is not cleared to work, I don't think can represent 4.5 million of his constituents. Every day that seat sits empty is a day that they have no voice in a chamber that's decided by a single vote. I think that's a dereliction of duty. He should resign immediately or be declared unfit to serve. Kentucky's own governor said it outright. Prove your capacity to serve or step down. And I don't think people are saying that with contempt. I say it because holding public trust, that you can no longer perform, isn't showing your strength. It's the opposite, and I think it rots our democracy. And here's why I think one senator's hospital room matters far beyond Kentucky. When people across our country watch a powerful man cling to office while his staff holds up a newspaper to prove that he's alive, something is clearly breaking. Maybe it's not a law, but I think it's something deeper. Our faith. The belief that the system is honest, that the people in charge are actually doing the job to serve you. And that faith, unfortunately, is already collapsing all around us. Which brings me to a book that I think every person over the age of 50 should read and understand, because it explains the world that your children and grandchildren are inheriting. A few years ago, a former CIA operative named Martin Gurri published a book called The Revolt of the Public. His thesis was, for the entire industrial age, elites kept power by controlling information. The government, the newspapers, the universities, those decided what you knew. Then the internet came along and totally destroyed that monopoly on information. Suddenly the public could see every failure, every evasion, every stage photo in real time. And Gurri warned that this would strip the old institutions of their authority faster than anyone expected. Think about this. He wrote this before Brexit, before Trump's election, before any of this stuff. And I think he totally predicted the sweeping changes that have been happening across our society as trust in the old institutions fails. And here's the hard part that Gurri predicted, and I want you to sit with it. The public is very good at tearing things down, but not yet good at building them back up. The public can renounce the system, the public can revolt, but so far the public cannot replace the system. So we end up as angry people without a plan to fix any of the problems. People who've lost faith in our institutions with nothing that we can agree on to replace them with. I think Mitch McConnell refusing to leave is a poster child for exactly what Gurri described. An old power structure that's out of touch, power hungry, and unyielding, and failing at the one basic duty that it owes the public, and now doing it on camera. Every viral clip of that stage photo is eroding our trust in the system, and that trust is already running low. The comedians have felt it even before the newspaper columnists did. On The Daily Show, Jon Stewart mocked McConnell's photo as totally believable evidence that Mitch McConnell is not only alive, but the happiest boy in the hospital. Then he stopped joking around and said, "You cannot have the country ruled by people this old and frail." So I think when those kind of monologues are saying out loud what much of the country privately believes, the institution has already lost the room. Now here's where I need older folks watching to lean in, because this is the most important thing, that I'll say today. At the exact moment that these powerful older elites are clinging on, a new kind of politics is rising from the young, and it is openly socialist. In a 2025 Cato Institute poll, 62% of Americans under 30 said that they viewed socialism favorably. Gallup found that favorable views of capitalism have dropped to 54%, the lowest ever recorded. And in November 2025, New York City elected a 34-year-old Democratic Socialist mayor, Zohran Mamdani, on one of the highest voter turnouts in decades, with young voters as his base. Let me be clear where I personally stand. I don't believe in socialism. I think its track record throughout history is extremely poor, and its promises rarely survive contact with reality. But this is my whole point. Do not dismiss this. Do not wave it away as just young people being naive. Because I think we've seen this movie before. 10 years ago, the coastal elites looked at the industrial and rural America, the closed factories, the opioid deaths, the hollowed-out towns, and they just ignored it. They thought it was fringe. They said that populism would blow over. Then Trump and the MAGA movement swept the country, and those same elites were stunned because they'd never bothered to understand the pain that was underneath all of that. I think today's youth socialism wave is the same signal from the other direction. It's not going to evaporate simply because middle-aged and older people disagree with it. I think it's real, and it's addressing a real problem. Young people who did everything right and still can't afford a house, a family, a future. Dismiss the problem, and the movement will only keep growing. So let's not argue with the label, but let's try to actually understand what's making people upset. And let's think about why people are rejecting the system. By the way, if this is interesting for you, please do me a favor and share it with someone in your family or a friends group who needs to hear it, especially someone of a different generation. So now let's name the problem. There's a word you're going to hear, I think, more and more in the coming months: gerontocracy. That means rule by the old. The day before McConnell broke his silence, Senator Lindsey Graham of South Carolina, at age 71, a Washington fixture for decades, died suddenly hours after returning from Ukraine. He was the sixth member of this Congress to die in office, the sixth in one term. When your leaders are, on average, decades older than the people they govern, I think it becomes a problem because they don't understand the issues that the population is actually dealing with in their day-to-day lives. A Yale professor, Samuel Moyn, wrote a controversial new book on this topic called Gerontocracy in America. And his argument is really blunt. Today's power structure is held entirely by older elites. And he points out something that you'll never forget. Our upper chamber is called the Senate. That word comes from the Latin senatus, from senex, which means literally old man. We have a branch of government named after old men. Moyn calls modern America an old-igarchy. And the numbers really back him up. The median senator today is 64 years old. The median House member is 57. 24 members of Congress are 80 or older. The oldest senator, Chuck Grassley, is 92. If he wins his next term, he'll be 101 when it ends. 101, think about that. But it wasn't always like this. From 1919 to 1999, 80 years, the median senator was never over 60. In the early 1980s, the medians were 48 years old in the House and 51 years old in the Senate. The leaders who built our modern American middle class were in their late 40s and 50s. Today's leaders are pushing 65 and beyond. Something has changed in the politics and in who holds the money. But I also, everyone watching, my clear perspective on this. Age itself is not the enemy. I think there is real wisdom in older people. And people of ancient societies understood this even better than we do today. 2,000 years ago, Cicero wrote in his work on old age. He described an old farmer planting trees. Someone asks him why, because he'll never sit under their shade. The farmer answers that he plants the trees so that he can hand something to the next generation. I think that is the ideal elder in a society, planting for a future that they'll never see. The Greek playwright Sophocles lived to about age 90. Later in his life, his own sons hauled him into court, claiming he was senile, and they were trying to seize control of his estate. His defense? He stood and read aloud from the play he was writing at that very moment, Oedipus at Colonus, one of the greatest works in theater history at the time. The judges just threw the case out. So the lesson here isn't that the old are frail. It's the opposite. Mental capacity is what matters, and it must be demonstrated, not assumed, in either direction. Even Ronald Reagan got it. In the 1984 presidential debates, asked if at age 73 he was too old, he smiled and answered, "I'm not going to exploit, for political purposes, my opponent's youth and inexperience." And the room just started laughing. His opponent laughed. Reagan proved his capacity with wit in real time. I think that's the difference. An elder who demonstrates capacity and plants trees for the future is a gift to the society. But a system that is rotting, where a small group of older elites simply refuse to ever let go of power, is a trap. And it stops being about respect and starts being about power and money. Because I think the aging of our leadership mirrors the aging of our wealth. Baby boomers, about a fifth of the American population, hold roughly $85 trillion, 51% of all the wealth in America. Americans over 70, who are just 11% of the population, own about 31% of the nation's wealth. That's up from 19% just in 1989. Millennials, which are a generation almost as large as the boomers, hold roughly 18 trillion, roughly a fifth of what baby boomers hold. For the first time in American history, people over the age of 70 hold more real estate wealth than Americans in their prime earning years, ages 40 to 54. Think about what that means for a young family trying to buy a first home to raise their kids. The ladder that older generations climbed, affordable housing, wages that kept up, steady promotions, it hasn't gotten any longer. In much of the country, the ladder has just been pulled up entirely. And I think there's going to be a backlash from younger people. I think that's the root cause under all this socialism talk. When you're 28, priced out of a home, watching 84-year-olds cling to power and 92-year-old senators run for Senate again for 6 more years, you're told that the system's working fine. You start asking, who's it working for? So I think we should not dismiss that anger. We should think about where it comes from. And here's the cruel irony that keeps this whole machine locked in place. Young people have the least power to change at the ballot box because they usually vote the least. In 2024, about 47% of people age 18 to 29 voted. Among seniors 65 and up, it was closer to 70%. So older people outvote the young and then govern for the short term for the voters in front of them, while the young inherit the long-term bill. Interestingly, what do Americans want to do about it? Here's the surprise. On this topic, we are not divided. In Pew Research surveys, 79% favor a maximum age limit for federal officials. 87% favor term limits for Congress. Only 3% think a president should ideally be in their 70s or older. Republicans and Democrats are all in near total agreement. So why does nothing change? I think 2 reasons. First, the law. In 1995, in U.S. term limits versus Thornton, the Supreme Court ruled 5-4 that states cannot impose term limits on Congress. The only path left is a constitutional amendment, and that's a long and steep road. Second, and let's just say it openly, the people who'd have to pass that amendment, the very same people, are the ones it would remove. Nearly 80% of this country wants it, and yet it goes nowhere. I think that right there is gerontocracy defending itself. Exactly the failing, unyielding institution that Martin Gurri warned about in his book. So now let me connect the senator's hospital room to what I see every day in caregiving. And if you've cared for an aging parent, you may know the hardest conversation. It's often about the car keys. The moment that you realize mom's dementia is getting worse and she shouldn't be driving. Or that dad can't manage the finances anymore and you have to help him step back, gently and lovingly. And before there's a crash. And you know how hard that is because they totally fight it. Not because they're bad people, but because letting go feels like admitting weakness. So remember Mitch McConnell's line. He said that folks of his generation hesitate to share the vulnerability that comes with growing older. I don't think that's just a senator talking. That's every proud older adult who won't admit they got lost driving home. The instinct to hide decline is deeply human, and a whole family will quietly cover for it until they can't. I think that's what we're watching right now on the national stage. A powerful man, his staff, and his family all quietly covering, holding up the newspaper, insisting everything's fine. I think that distinction matters both at home and in Washington, D.C. Respecting an elder's wisdom is not the same as enabling their denial of decline. One is love, the other, however well meant, is avoidance. There's an idea in healthcare called compression of morbidity, coined by Dr. James Fries in 1980, that aging well isn't about living forever. It's about staying vigorous as long as possible and then declining gracefully over a short time at the very end. So plant your trees, let the next generation grow. I think that's dignity. But dignity is not clinging onto the wheel until you crash. Dignity is knowing when to hand over the car keys. So should Mitch McConnell resign? I think not in disgrace, but in grace. And beyond one man, I think it's time we hold the national conversation that 79% of us already agree on. Age limits, term limits, and a real renewal in our elected leaders. If you're navigating this caregiving situation in your own family right now, the car keys, the checkbook, these difficult conversations, you're not alone. Call the elder care locator at 1-800-677-1116 or dial 211 or reach out to your local area agency on aging. And before you go, please subscribe, follow along, and share this with one person, either young or old, who needs to hear this. The goal is not to push our elders aside, but it's to build a country that honors its elders and makes room for its young. I think a society that pulls up the ladder behind it doesn't just frustrate the young people of today. It risks losing its own future.